something that has really spiked in this new world that we're living in with technology is child sex trafficking. This is something that has, I think, it's been talked about for years and years, but I think this year specifically, I have seen a lot more conversation, a lot more, even just conspiracy and different things. I mean, just so much conversation around child sex trafficking. And so I would love if we could just talk about that for a little bit. You know, I want to start by talking through what child sex trafficking is, kind of the difference between child sex trafficking versus adults and women and men. Let's talk about it.
Yeah. So generally, sex trafficking, human trafficking is defined as like using force, fraud, or coercion to compel someone into commercial sex, like against their will. Now, for like a child or someone who is a minor, that force, fraud, or coercion doesn't have to be there. It's just if you force a minor into commercial sex, that's human trafficking. And so it's just important to kind of have that in mind, in that these individuals, these children are often the people who try to traffic them. They use means to make them believe maybe it's going to be a better life, or feel really cared about, or
Right, I was going to say like grooming.
Yes.
Big thing with kids.
Yeah, grooming is a big thing. And that's an important thing that like parents can do, is educate their kids about what grooming is, what that looks like. Like, for example, when you as a parent have a conversation with your kid about sex, having that sex talk, you know, really talking with them about like what's good touch, what's bad touch, and having them be aware of how their body feels. And like if they're ever talking to someone and they feel uncomfortable, listening to that and telling them, no matter who it is, come and talk to me about it, because your body's telling you something. And that can simply just be like a conversation that didn't feel right with an adult, and that could be a grooming behavior. And making sure that your child is aware of, you know, they may try to talk about things that are inappropriate, or they may try to give you things to maybe do something inappropriate with them, or an adult may tell you, let's keep this just between us, or as a secret. And making your kids aware that it's not okay. You know, healthy adults aren't going to ask kids to have secrets.
Yeah. I was going to ask, you know, why is it important that we understand what child sex trafficking is, but you kind of just answered it for me and just touched on it. But I just think of even the importance of us as adults being able to pick up on things, really being mindful of the people that we're interacting with, and whether or not something is okay that's happening with a child in front of you. You know, I've heard so many stories of different people on airlines, and even just, you know, at the mall, and a kid with an uncle or an aunt or something like that, picking up on things. And typically it's because they knew the signs, they knew what they were looking for. And when they saw it, they were able to do something to help.
Yeah, definitely. I think those signs are very important in recognizing, like with a kid, first kind of as the parent, the preventative measures, like we talked just a little bit ago about some of the grooming. If you don't feel comfortable with someone, making sure they're telling you, or a trusted adult, no matter who it is, because there's this misconception that it's going to be by someone they don't know, but it can happen by someone they do know.
And a lot of times it does.
Yeah, it can be, you know, a boyfriend or a relative or something like that. And I guess as kids, maybe it's kind of young to have a boyfriend or girlfriend, but, you know, someone that they know.
Right. And I think it's cool that you even just touched on that, because I think when people think of child sex trafficking, they think child, like, you know, 10 and under. But it's any minor, you know, any child, you know, under the age of 18 is a part of that.
Yeah. And some things, you know, can be aware of is like, if you see someone like where maybe you're trying to ask them something or having a conversation, and they're looking around at the person next to them, they're feeling like they don't have the freedom to like talk, or they have to ask permission, or maybe they're not feeling like they're free to like leave their situation, leave that person. Maybe you see some concerns with like hygiene, clothes, they're not being taken care of. Those can be some signs, as well as something to be aware of, like the signs of sexual abuse, because sometimes that can come into play where they're maybe over sexualized, and so they are doing things that would be inappropriate for their age, or maybe on their Facebook page or social media there's very sexualized content. That can be some warning signs as well. And you know, we should say that just one of these things doesn't mean that someone's being sex trafficked, but you know, when you see something, say something, or take that into account, because there are many times where you'll see these one little things, and it's important that we bring attention to them, because there may be something going on that you didn't even know.
Yeah, well, I mean, I even think of it being our responsibility as adults, as, good adults in this world, to be able to protect these kids, especially when they feel like they can't protect themselves. Who's going to protect them? Not the person who is, putting them in that situation. I mean, it's us. It's those of us who know the signs and know what to look for and are able to speak into that situation and hopefully save kids from really tough stuff. So I guess I'd love it if we could talk for a few minutes about some practical tips, specifically to parents
Yeah,
who need to have this conversation with their kids, because it is a conversation that needs to happen, even, young, with
yeah,
young kids. I mean, how do you have that conversation? Even I think of kids who maybe don't necessarily understand what sex is yet. How do you have that conversation with them?
yeah, definitely. You know, I think at a young age, you know, when you're teaching about like stranger danger, or you know, we can't trust everyone, having that conversation with your child about, you know, there are some people in this world that aren't nice to kids, and they don't treat them with care, and we have to be aware of that. And so if you ever feel uncomfortable or something's not right, come and tell me. You never have to stay in a situation where you don't feel comfortable, no matter who it is. Um, as well as kind of letting them know to trust their instincts, because sometimes you'll get that icky feeling and you're like, what's that about? And letting them know, hey, trust that, and get help. Um, Also, just being aware of, um, or having a conversation with them about what's good touch and bad touch, because sometimes we don't really do that, and so the kids don't really realize, okay, if someone's asking to do things, is this a game? And they don't really understand that that's not okay. So having these upfront conversations about what's appropriate, what's not, and making sure these things are coming from you, because unfortunately nowadays young kids get exposed to sex and content way younger than we were aware of, or than you would want them to be. And so it's important that it comes from you first. I also think another important piece of it is teaching your kids about safety on the internet, because sex traffickers will use internet, social media, to like target them, to get them kind of interested, or even getting information about them so that they can use that against them later. One thing is also that's helpful to keep in mind is kind of the progression of how sex trafficking happens, and like the person that wants to sex traffic someone, they'll identify the target. Maybe that target is a kid who they feel like doesn't have a whole lot of support around them, or that they're an easy target. And then they'll create dependency, and that might be by asking for information, asking for pictures. Maybe it could be, if it's someone that doesn't have a good support network, maybe they provide them with things, and the person feels dependent on them. And then their next tactic is to isolate them, get them away from the support that they have, and so that they don't have that to help them out of that situation. Then they'll also kind of punish them if that trafficked person doesn't want to do what like the perpetrator wants, and so then they ultimately have like that control, and so it's also hard for them to leave. And so that's why understanding that for prevention, but then also to be able to help in those situations, is important.
Yeah, you just mentioned all of those different kind of steps into being in that situation. I just think Man, like that's hard. That would be hard as an adult to experience. But when you're a child, you
Yeah.
maybe don't even realize the things that you're feeling, the things that you're thinking. I mean, I can't imagine experiencing those things. I mean, it's so frightening, and it feels, as a kid, maybe it feels a little normal. I'm not really sure. But I can just see in what you just mentioned that being difficult for me as an adult.
Yes, yeah. I think too that's why as parents, having conversations with your kids about good boundaries, about what a healthy relationship looks like, how people will communicate with you, how a healthy person communicates with you, how we talk respectfully to one another, how you're not expected to do things you don't feel comfortable with. Or if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Or if you're ever questioning if this is right or wrong, come and talk to me about it. Or if you don't trust me, go and talk to a school counselor or a teacher at school that you trust. And just encouraging that healthy support network.
Yeah, we've talked about it a lot today, just the trust
Yeah.
and honesty around parenting with your kids. And I mean, this is, a whole nother level. We were talking earlier about teenage daughters and, giving them freedoms and building that trust with them. But then it's like you think, I mean, this could be so much more serious, when it comes to things like this. Like, you want to have that trust built with your kids because you want to prevent anything like that from ever happening.
Right, right. I think it also kind of goes back to being involved in your kid's life as much as you can. Knowing who they're going, spending time with, what they're doing on the internet, and making sure that you're not avoiding these conversations, because I know there can be anxiety and fear about it, but it's so important that it comes from you and you keep the discussion going. You keep the conversation open, that they can talk with you about these things, and it's important that they do. And there's no shame or embarrassment. I want to help you with this.
Yeah. So good. So good. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
just answering that, September. And I hope that the people watching don't walk away from this feeling anxious or stressed. I mean, I don't want anyone to walk away with that feeling. I want this to be empowering, and, that you are your child's protector, and, you want to build that trust and you want to keep them safe, and it's good. And so hopefully this is an empowering conversation for the people watching.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too to make about when you have these conversations with your children. The point isn't to have them feel anxious and fearful that the world is ultimately a bad place, but that let's just be aware of our surroundings, let's be aware of things. It's not something that we have to be anxious about all the time or fearful about. It's just something that we need to be aware of, and when we can, practice just these preventative measures.